All right, guys, so what I have realized is there is a lot of you watching my channel that really don't have any interest in becoming a hobby hunter. Really, why you're watching my content is for the same reason that you're out there watching friction fire content, how to make shelter content, more of the bushcraft, survival, how do I get along in an apocalyptic scenario skill set sense. If you're watching alone, hunting shows, survival shows, what is being depicted as the most effective way to hunt big game animals is total bullshit. So I'm making this video to clear that up and to give you 5 things to think about if you're in that category. And if you have no clue who I am, I don't blame you at all. My name's Cliff Gray. For over a decade, I've dedicated my life to guiding and outfitting big game hunts in the most remote parts of North America. My insights and strategies in all of my videos is just based on that data set and my experience. Let's jump in to the first thing you gotta understand as a brand new hunter, aspiring hunter, or just some guy that wants to be able to get some meat if the world falls apart. Animals know when they're being hunted. Personally, I think humans even do. We know when there's a predator that could be a threat to us around us. I have felt this many times in the woods, enough where it's not anecdotal. We're taking in a bunch of different variables at once that give us a sense if there's something threatening in the area. I can tell you that for a fact, the animals that you would want to hunt in this scenario that we're talking about, they're going to know immediately that they're being hunted, and they're being hunted by the masses. In the water, if you're spearfishing, it is really apparent. You can go snorkel on a reef, fish will come right up to you. Game fish that taste great will come right up to you. They're just curious, they're not threatened. The minute you start swimming around with one of those spear guns, all of a sudden those fish go away. And it's because you're putting out a certain vibe, you're making a certain type of eye contact, you're moving a certain way where you're a threat. So all these game populations, when they start getting hunted or they start getting hunted more, they change their behavior. So if you're in some urban area and you see white-tailed deer or you see elk on a daily basis and they seem dumb, they seem like you could just get out of the truck and hit them with a hammer and there's your big chunk of protein in this apocalyptic scenario, you are severely misguided. Within hours, they're gonna start changing their behavior. You have to understand this because it's gonna form all your tactics if your goal is to try to get meat when everybody else is. One of the key things they're gonna do is become more nocturnal. Go check out this video right here. I talk about one of the biggest mistakes that modern hunters make, and this applies to this scenario also. You have to learn how to hunt either at night. Again, in most places on earth right now, that's illegal. But in this scenario, at a bare minimum, you'd want to know that you had to be hunting right at dark, right as the sun went down and right as the sun came up, because that's when you're going to catch those animals. Even in an area that continue to have density of game, if they were getting a lot of pressure, they will be almost universally nocturnal. So you have to build your strategy around that. Now, there is gear that would help you in this situation, right? There's thermals, which allow you to detect animals in the dark. That would be a super useful tool in this scenario. Again, in a lot of places, this would be breaking the law. Not everywhere. You can hunt pigs in Texas with thermals. You can hunt predators in certain areas with thermals. But when we're talking about being efficient and being effective now on a population of game animals that just started getting hunted or is now getting way more pressure, you need to think about, how am I gonna hunt them at night? The other super apparent changes you're gonna see is they're gonna become way more sensitive in terms of giving humans a buffer, but also they're going to start giving buffers to any human travel routes, right? So any roads, any trails, any of that, all of a sudden the game you see today, if it doesn't get killed, it's gonna rapidly learn to give all those travel corridors a big buffer. Guys, biltong, okay? I have been obsessed with this stuff for 3 or 4 years. Ever since I got on a keto, carnivore, paleo-esque type of diet, I've had a hard time finding healthy snacks. Biltong is a great option, particularly the slabs that have this fat on the side. That's where your energy is if you're a fat burner like me. Super simple ingredients in this, guys. Literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ingredients. Compare that to your gas station jerky. A great snack in the backcountry or just day to day. Biltong Depot is a huge supporter of my content, go to their website, biltongdepot.com. Use my discount code CLIFFG, CLIFFG for 15% off at checkout and to support this content. Thanks, guys. Animals use their nose more than their sight, more than their hearing in most cases. Most of the species that you're going to want to kill in this scenario, the stuff that's got a lot of good meat on it, they use their nose. So you have to start to learn how the wind operates. And this is something you can learn in a theoretical sense. Check out this video right here. I dive deep into how hunters can use the wind, how animals use the wind to protect themselves. And it's really useful because once animals know that they're getting hunted, they become more sensitive to this. So just like sight, they're going to use their smell to give humans a much bigger buffer, and they're going to do it faster. All of that's going to integrate in how you do your stalks, how you get close to game, particularly in a world where you couldn't get ammo and rifle shooting is off the table, which is all sorts of scenarios where that could be the case. You know, our weapons could be taken from us, ammo could be limited. There's all these crazy scenarios we could think about where we no longer have firearms and we're hunting with bows, spears, whatever. If you get to that scenario, this becomes massive. You have got to understand how the wind operates and how you're going to use the wind to your advantage when you're killing animals, because if you are not a big hunter, and this is one where experienced hunters in the modern day are going to have a huge edge, but if you're not that, you have to understand how the wind works, how animals use scent to save themselves from getting killed. If you don't, your chances of killing a pressured animal are damn near zero. All right, so the third big concept, you have got to understand how we as humans are evolved to see game. And this is going to apply to pretty much any approach to getting protein, including fishing, including trapping. It's going to be obvious on spot and stalk ambush killing. This could be, you know, the flash of a mule deer buck, the twitch of an elk ear, birds over bait on the ocean, the flash of sardines in the water. This is how we see sources of protein. A lot of people, and unfortunately this includes a big chunk of the hunting community, they think you put up binoculars and you just look for the animal. I'm looking for an antler. I'm looking for the whole profile of the animal. Most of the time you're never gonna see that. Oh yeah, I saw the elk. I saw the form of the elk. You didn't actually see the form of the elk. You saw the twitch. You saw the movement, and that's how you identify animals. That's how we have evolved to identify animals. And you can get this into your strategies and tactics, and it's going to make you a way better hunter. I'll dive into that in a second. But what's cool about this is there's a lot of evidence to suggest our eyes are actually evolved to see movement over color when you look at it in the spectrum across species. Our rods and cones and our whole visual system is developed around this concept to optimally pick up motion, and that's how you're going to find game. There's actually a bunch of research that suggests that this is also a difference between males and females in the human species. One, a way bigger chunk of us as males are colorblind. We see much less shade than females. It's something like 7% of males are classified as colorblind. I'm one of them. You can still see colors, but you have some difficulty with shades. Where with females, it's way less than 1% of the population. So there's that big difference. But even when you look at giant data sets and you compare men versus women, what they find is that the difference in the depth of color, the setup of the rods and cones makes it so women can see colors better, but men can see less color depth, but that actually allows them to pick up movement easier. And one of the theories that a lot of scientists put out there is the reason this is different is that men historically for thousands of years have been focused on hunting, so there's just been an evolved difference between the sexes there. All right, so how do you take advantage of this as a hunter? How do you optimize your ability to pick up movement? Because that's how you're gonna see game, you're gonna see protein out there, right? So there's a couple ways you can do it. One, you can physically stabilize your binoculars, or you can just physically stabilize yourself. You don't wanna move around all the time. Even if you're sitting here, you don't have binoculars, you wanna sit, you wanna frame inside your knees as you glass with binoculars, or even if you're looking and you wanna just be still, control your own movement so you can pick up the movement of the protein, the movement of the game out there. I'll stick a video up right here. You can check it out where I go over that exact concept as it applies to Western big game hunting, how you control that movement. There's tools you can use on binoculars, right? You can put them on a tripod, you can set them over a log, you can sit them on a shooting stick. That's really important, and it's gonna up your game in a huge way. Now, there is technology out there that allows you to do it better too. There's image stabilized binoculars. I talk about the SIG ones a lot. I'll stick a video up right here. You can check it out. I go over the pros and cons, and they're awesome. They work incredible. The only real negative is they are technology. So in this case, what we're talking about in a scenario that, you know, the world implodes, you gotta have those binoculars for one thing if you wanna use the technology, but you also gotta have batteries, right? So however you feel, if that is worth it or not, that's like a personal choice, and really, you know, how you frame this whole problem. Cliff's Hunter, I created this knife from iteration in the field. It has been modified and perfected for the backcountry use case. It is my belief that in terms of all-around knives, this is the last knife that an elk hunter, mule deer hunter, sheep hunter, goat hunter will need to buy. Go check it out on my website, pursuitwithcliff.com. In the top right, click shop, then Cliff's Hunter. All the details are there. The next big concept that you got to understand, you have to look through the bias that's out there in the media right now when it comes to hunting, and you have to focus on what's actually the most effective way to acquire meat. If you think that the best way to acquire meat is to mimic the hunts that you see where I'm videoed, or you see Steve Rinella on Meat Eater, you're going to be super inefficient. Probably the least efficient way to hunt game for meat is the ways that you see depicted in the media right now. And the reason is that every rule and every cultural norm, or the vast majority of them, are actually geared around conserving game, right? So the practical implications of that is that the rules are making it harder to kill wild game and acquire meat, because if it was easy, there'd be too much strain on the resource and it would affect the wildlife populations. Obviously, this is a good thing and you should follow all the rules. But from a skill set perspective, if you're looking at hunting as a skill set that you want to set right next to fire starting, shelter building, just survivalist stuff, you have to look at it in a different framework. My first job when I was 13, 14 years old was coyote eradication, and I used snares a lot, so I was exposed to trapping that way. I've trapped a lot throughout my life. So I've been exposed to a lot of these different methods, and I can tell you, hands down, the best way to acquire meat, and this includes big game animals, is snares. Snares made out of modern materials. As a matter of fact, if you look at the few cases of true subsistence hunting on this planet right now, it's mostly in Africa. When you look at subsistence hunting up in Canada, up in Alaska, I hate to say it, but a lot of it is not true necessity-based subsistence hunting and fishing. It is a choice-driven subsistence hunting and fishing, and because of that, there's still a lot of regulations on it. But if you look at true subsistence killing of animals, you've got to look at, poaching in Africa, areas like that. All of it is a horrible thing, but you have to realize that a proportion of it is people that are truly destitute, truly poor, truly need the meat, and that's why they're doing it. Almost solely, they're using snares with modern materials. If you look at the old journals of mountain men, they were using traps, but they didn't have the modern material that we have now. If you start using aircraft cable, modern material to snare, you can snare anything. Do some reading on snaring, how to build drags out of snares, where if you were to catch an animal in a situation where you can't lock down the snare on a tree or a fence post or something like that, it's just in the wide open, you can create drags. There's a lot of different ways you can use snares to acquire game. On the flip side of this, there might be some forms of hunting that you think, from just viewing it as an outsider, you think are very effective and almost unsportsmanlike, right? So if you look at baiting bears or baiting deer, baiting whatever species, it is super effective, right? If you put a bunch of jelly donuts in a bin in an area with bears, they're gonna come there, you can sit, you can watch that, you can shoot them, right? If you're feeding a bunch of hay, deer and elk are probably going to show up. If you throw a bunch of apples in your yard, deer are going to show up. Yes, it's effective. But again, you have to frame this in the framework of we're talking about a skill set for survival. Baiting is effective, but it's not efficient. Almost always, people way underestimate the amount of resources that go into baiting. One, you have to have the bait. So that means you have to go acquire another resource before you can try to get the primary resource you're looking for. Well, in a world where you're destitute and you need to do this, it's going to be hard to get bait. The other thing is baiting takes a lot of time. You have to get the animal in the habit of coming to the bait. You could throw out apples, or mashed up rotten apples that even smell, and it may take 2 weeks before the deer even feel comfortable going there. And then for a week and a half, they might just touch it a little bit. And then, maybe a month and a half later, they're starting to feel really comfortable and they're consistently coming in to those apples. It's a really inefficient way of acquiring meat. And yes, it is used. There's a lot of places where baiting is legal. And yeah, there's a huge debate and there's legitimate pros and cons on each side. I get that argument. I'm not going to dive into it. I'm just talking about if you need to get some meat, baiting sucks. Of course, the question that's probably popping up in your mind is then why do modern hunters do it? The reason modern hunters do it, once you have it established, animals come into it, they come in consistently, they're at close range, you can observe them, you can decide if it makes sense to shoot that one, this one, whatever. Those are really more of a hunting experience type of thing. It has nothing to do with tying both those variables together, being effective and efficient. Baiting is not efficient, it's only effective. Calling is the same way. There's thousands of hours of content on YouTube about calling turkeys, ducks, elk. I have videos on these topics. And yes, within the hunting world, it makes a lot of sense to know how to do these. But again, this is about the experience and being effective in the experience that we can do now in a modern day and have fun when we're out there hunting. It's fun to call an elk, but it's not an efficient way to kill elk. One, you've got to learn the skill set. You've got to look for certain situations to call in elk. It just doesn't make sense. It's going to differ a little bit on region you're in, topography you're in, and species that you have available to you. But in general, this is the hierarchy that I would consider. Trapping at the top, snaring within that is a huge one, and that applies to small game and big game. If we throw in the fishing world, I would say knowing how to create a gill net, create passive nets, know how to throw a cast net, those are super efficient and effective ways to acquire protein almost anywhere on earth. The next one I think you should focus on is ambush killing. I'll stick a video up here that's on elk tracking, goes through the nitty-gritty of scat, footprints, rubs, scrapes, all that stuff. It's going to apply to most ungulates, honestly, so go check that video out. It'll give you a feel for tracking, but you've got to know those things to do ambush killing, and basically that just means sitting on a point, sitting on a trail crossing and shooting game with an arrow or a rifle or whatever. That's a pretty efficient and effective method of killing game. After that, I'd throw in spot and stock. In some scenarios, it is efficient and effective. Other scenarios, it takes a massive amount of resources for what you're getting, right? You got to drive all over the place. You've got to cover miles. All right, so the fifth concept, group hunting. Looking for animals that you can help another person get to, pushing animals to other hunters. These concepts are utilized in modern day hunting, but we don't talk about them all that much. One, there's some ethical implications. Some people don't agree with pushing game. Everybody feels differently about using radios during hunts, from using them for safety reasons all the way to telling somebody where a game animal is as they stalk it. There's all across the spectrum different opinions if that's appropriate. In certain areas, it's illegal. It's a total minefield in the modern day. But I can tell you that it's effective. Group hunting is a huge thing and it's super effective. If you really dive into how people have hunted for the vast majority of our history, it is utilizing the advantages of a group. So a couple ways people do this is one, a variation of ambush hunting, right? Get people set up in a choke point with rifles, with bows, with spears, whatever, and then have other people push the game through that natural choke point. That's a great way to acquire protein that's efficient and effective. Now, if you want to integrate in modern technology, radios are huge. Like I said, this is a minefield legally and ethically in the US right now. You can't use radios everywhere. In a lot of places it's shunned. But in terms of pure effectiveness and efficiency, using radios to kill game is massive. If you want to be prepared for this scenario, this is a concept that you should understand and really think about how you would implement it with family, friends. All right, the next big concept. You have to understand that certain species, really most species, have some sort of seasonality in terms of their susceptibility. Now, in a general sense, if you have a lot of snow in your region, animals are going to be at peak susceptibility when that snow is the deepest. It's harder for them to move around, and they're limited in terms of what habitat they can be in, and they can still get to feed because they got to paw through the snow to get to that feed. For the most part, there's no growing vegetation at that time, so they really got to work for it, and they're very susceptible, and they're congregated into small areas, and those areas tend to be lower elevation where humans can get to them. So that's something you want to figure out in your region on the species that you would hypothetically target. The other thing you want to figure out is when they're susceptible in terms of their breeding season. Most of these species breed a couple months of the year, and during that time, their general senses, their instincts, the things that keep them alive and keep it where it's very difficult for you to kill them, like those things that I told you hype up if all of a sudden they know they're hunting, the nocturnal nature of them, those sort of elements, they let that down a little bit. That gets a little more lax during their breeding season. So in a lot of western states, elk rut in September through early October, deer tend to rut in November through December, but it's all regionally based. Elk rut completely different dates in California. Different subspecies of deer will rut at different times. So understand that, research that. That's huge. And that falls into maybe like a sub idea here. You have to get in the mindset that if you're acquiring meat and you're trying to be efficient and effective, and you threw in that group concept that I'm talking about, you want to kill a lot of animals at once. And then you also want to throw in, I'll have to do a video on it, knowing how to store that meat and keep it for a long period of time. Now, if you've gotten this far, you're wondering, okay, Cliff, where are the hard tactics? What does an elk footprint look like? What does it look like when it's running? The dwelling on that is created by the media that you see out there, the survival shows, Alone, all of that stuff. That stuff doesn't matter if you don't understand these bigger concepts. But one thing that does matter, and I've got a great video for you, I'll stick it right here. It's on how to gut a deer. This runs you through on the GoPro, so you see it from first person perspective, how you would clean a deer, elk, whatever, it all applies the same anatomy, how you would get them ready for consumption. That is super important that you know how to do it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like it, subscribe. I'll talk to you later.